Hello and welcome to the SuperConnectivity Podcast. I'm your host, Charming Charlie Esser, and today with me is...
The amazing Alil.
The amazing Alil. Always amazing. Thanks for joining me today, Alil. I wanted us to talk today about the other thing that was interesting in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. last night, not the big Avengers teaser trailer we got, although that was wonderful, but the little brief clip of Agent Carter that I think was new to be new to be broadcast as well. Agent Carter, as we all know, is coming out to ABC this January for an 8-part special series. And today, I was hoping you and I could talk about what they might put into Agent Carter.
Yeah, it was interesting that we got all of that yesterday. I would have thought that there would have been a bigger focus on, the teaser for Agent Carter, especially because that will be on during the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. hiatus. But even for the little, 30 seconds we got, I was excited for it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, it's, I don't know how much of that was shot for the teaser and how much will actually be, because it seemed very stylized. So I got the feeling that most of what we saw there was shot for the teaser, very little for the actual broadcast. But who knows? But they definitely seem to be going for that very a very noirish kind of woman trying to make it in a hyper sexist world, which could be interesting, without a doubt. Well, we know it's going to be interesting because I think the short that we've already gotten of Agent Carter was really fascinating, and seeing her in this world is going to be equally good. Now, one of the things that I wrote up recently in the blog was discussing various characters that we might see from the 1940s Marvel Comics that we haven't seen yet, who could find their way into the Agent Carter series. So one of the characters that I think would be most interesting to have, and really I think the most interesting character that they can have, just to show a bit of one of the characters whom I think could prove to be a real co-star to Agent Ross in this would be, Agent Carter is Elizabeth Ross. Elizabeth Ross, or Betsy Ross, as she was called, was the late 40s Captain America's sidekick called Golden Girl. Which actually interesting is she was Agent 13, which was actually who Peggy Carter has been sort of retconned into. The original Agent 13 was originally Elizabeth Ross. Later it got retconned to be Peggy Carter was Agent 13, and of course now Sharon Carter is Agent 13. So it's a very interesting little cycle between these characters of Peggy Carter and Elizabeth Ross. What of course eventually happens with Elizabeth Ross is she winds up as the partner of Jeff Mace, who is the third Captain America, and after Steve Rogers was Captain America, and winds up married to him and having this life. And I've always thought that idea of the continuing Captain Americas would be a very interesting place for them to explore with the Agent Carter series, just because her history is so tied to Captain America, obviously, in the MCU. And there was this unfulfilled romantic relationship that she had with Captain America in the stories. And to have these other men coming in, taking on the role, being the hero of Captain America, and, her having some sort of tangential relationship to them, the conflicts that brings up for her, I think is a very, very interesting romantic triangle to explore as far as these 50s characters. And of course, when you're looking at possible storylines, I think for the 1940s and the changing nature of the world in which we live in the post-war, going into the Cold War, I think that Captain America makes for an interesting character, and how that relates to Peggy Carter and the other people in the spy game at that time proves interesting.
Now that's very interesting that that you would go that route. But what if, because this is such a, I guess, a female-centric role, that they go, instead of with the second or third Captain America, and kind of, they could address that in a sense that, there were others that took on the mantle, but maybe getting a little bit of focus from Miss America, who was played by, Madeline Joyce, I believe, and maybe bring her in and kind of, because we've already got that hybrid of with Peggy Carter, maybe make, Madeline Joyce kind of that Agent 13 and kind of give her kind of that mantra. So, because we're already kind of melding some characters here and some backstory, that I think that having a female superhero here assisting Peggy might be really interesting.
Well, that would be amazing if they bring in Madeline Joyce. Now, Madeline Joyce, for those who don't know, she was a character called Miss America, who was in really, when you look at all of her power sets, she was one of the most powerful characters in Marvel at that time, which is, interesting that, all the way back in the 1940s, Marvel was, or at that time, Timely, was willing to say, let's have our really powerful characters be a female. She had flight, super strength, X-ray vision. She was very much a Superman, or I guess a Supergirl pastiche, in a universe that didn't actually have a Superman at that time. And what is interesting with her now? Of course, she's married to the Wizard.
Yes, and that's where I was going to go with that also, because then we can introduce the Wizard, who I think would be a great hero for TV.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now, what's really interesting going into this, and I doubt they're going to touch on this, but if they did, it would be really unique, is of course that when they first introduced Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch, they were actually planned to be the children of the Wizard, who of course is a speedster like Quicksilver, and Miss America. That they were their lost children from a previous story, and that actually was their history for a very long time, until they decided to retcon that to make Magneto their father. So, given that they don't have Magneto, I've always wondered if they might ever consider resurrecting that old history, and bringing their Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver into that history there. What's also interesting with Madeline Joyce is that she actually had an issue later in her stories where her powers started essentially to fade, and the use of her X-ray vision led to, damaging of her eyes, forcing her to wear glasses, and things of this nature. And I've always thought that was always an interesting thing to explore, how being a superhuman might, especially, in this 1940s time when you don't really have, we're becoming superhuman maybe wasn't yet perfected, how you could have these negative outcomes to your body, to your life from these things. I could also imagine, I've always imagined this story, that if they explore Madeline Joyce, depending on where exactly they're putting the time frame, if they have to bring in Madeline Joyce and the Wizard and, sort of bringing them out of retirement, the idea that after the war, they sort of hang up their tights and are trying to, blend into, late post-war domesticity, and have to sort of come out of retirement and the conflicts that brings into their relationship. I mean, it's all there's so many things in this story that I think are in the Peggy Carter story that I think they have to explore with this idea of this changing social roles that you have in the post-war world, where you have these women like Peggy Carter, who are these, capable, intelligent women that during the war, went out and put their lives on the line or did whatever they were asked to do to support the country. And then at the end of the war, they find this, rigid sexist society trying to hold them back and not quite sure, how to navigate that world now. Because of course, we can look at it with our modern sensibilities, just say, well, why would you stand for that? But at the time, that was the only world you knew. The expectations that were there are there. And how you deal with them, is a fascinating tale. Especially if you have someone who is coming into conflict with you, from the perspective of someone who is living this, empowered, separate life, and someone else who has found that domestic life, like Madeline Joyce, where she has that domestic life, that expected life, and Peggy Carter has the adventurous life. Although obviously, I'm sure on some level, Peggy Carter was really kind of hoping to, at this point, maybe be in that domestic life with Steve Rogers, and that was something that was denied to her. Although we do know that she eventually marries someone who, hopefully, we'll get to find out who that someone might have been in the series. But we know that this was someone who was rescued by Captain America in that first movie.
Did you read the synopsis of the show?
I have read it. I know that it's mostly, well, at least I've read one synopsis of the show. It looks like that they're setting it in the immediate post-war after Captain America, prior to the actual founding of S.H.I.E.L.D. that we see in the short. So it's actually sort of a prequel to the short. Although, I don't know exactly where it's at as far as what the story is going on. So, for example, we know we have 8 episodes. I don't know if it's going to be all taking place before the Zodiac short, or if you'll have some before and some after. I actually even wonder if maybe they can expand through a couple decades in that. You have 8 shows. You could start in that pre-Zodiac short world, and by the time you end, you could be well into the 60s with Peggy Carter and where her life is.
They actually released a brief little synopsis of it that I could read right now. And I actually, after reading this, and I'll give you my thoughts right after, but it basically says, when an old acquaintance in Howard Stark, Dominic Cooper from Captain America First Avenger, finds himself being framed for unleashing his deadliest weapon to anyone willing to pony up the cash, he contacts Peggy, the only person he can trust, to track down those responsible, dispose of the weapons, and clear his name. He empowers his butler, Edwin Jarvis, played by James Darcy, master and commander of the far side of the world, to be at her beck and call when needed to help assist her as she investigates and tracks down those responsible for releasing these weapons of mass destruction. But Jarvis, who is a creature of habit and sticks to a rigid daily routine, is going to have to make some major life changes if he's going to be able to keep up with Peggy. If caught going on these secret missions for Stark, Peggy could be targeted as a traitor and spend the rest of her days in prison or worse. And as she delves deeper into her investigation, she may find that those she works for are not who they seem, and she might even begin to question whether Stark is as innocent as he claims.
Well, that's great. I had not actually read that yet. And that does sound like a fascinating story. And, within that, now, of course, I don't know exactly the details of what the, great weapons are or what she has, but this actually brings me to another character who might be very interesting to explore in the Peggy Carter series, and that is the character of Faith Bradley. Now, Faith Bradley is not an original 1940s character, but she is a character who in our modern Marvel mythos exists in the 1940s. She, of course, was the wife of Isaiah Bradley, who was in Red, White, and Truth, the African-American subject of the later super soldier serum experiments. Which, if we're going in the MCU, would theoretically be when they reference the scientists in El Gordo, that they want to send Steve Rogers down to sort of be examined by to try and recreate the serum, would be the people that are working on this. And the idea that, of course, in his storyline after the war, he's sort of because he was a human experimentation that never volunteered. He gets sent to Leavenworth as part of a cover-up. I can very much see this character of Faith Bradley as Peggy is investigating these issues coming across Peggy as part of her investigation, as part of trying to find out where her husband is being held, freeing her. And, that of course can lead to, very interesting stories. Again, dealing with the culture of the 1940s, both not only of sexual repression, but racial animus that exists in the time. And, it's very fascinating whenever you are going to have someone investigating, the dark underbelly of the world that existed we have this idealized view of the 1940s. Not the least of which because of characters like Captain America, who, represent that, idealized, we're all in it together kind of vibe. And of course, what I think, if you're a fan of Captain America, which I am, one of the things that has repeatedly been shown is that, Captain America, although he embodies that, he was always the exception. He wasn't the rule. And of course, and that sort of, that seems to be where they're going with this idea that as you're investigating this, and of course she's going to be finding out about, the paperclip agents and of course, that is where it gets interesting because of course, Howard Stark is going to be dealing with the Hydra agents who are working for the Forerunners of S.H.I.E.L.D., for the Strategic Scientific Reserve that have been brought in. He's going to know about them.
Yeah, and I think that's what this show is going to focus on. I really think it's going to be more of S.H.I.E.L.D. and less of superpowered beings. We're talking about 8 episodes. I think if it gets picked up for more, I think then there's the possibility of further exploration. Because we the rumors are, and we've already confirmed now that, Howard Stark has a piece of this. There's issues with, weapons being sold. There's talks of other Howling Commandos being involved. And I really think that it's going to focus on things that we've seen in the first Avenger. We got that teaser clip. Was it the opening of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. this year? I'm lost. Where we had Peggy Carter find the obelisk. And
yes.
And I think it's going to be kind of focused on that. It's going to be her as a spy and doing things on her own and reaching out to those that she can trust, just like Howard reached out to her. And I think it's going to be more of digging into the S.H.I.E.L.D. Hydra merging, like, where we're going to see some of these Easter eggs that maybe she's not going to catch, and that's why it's more of a mystery. Because I really would wish that they would get into a lot of these other characters that we haven't seen in a long time. I just don't know if I think they're going to really play it safe here, kind of like how they did with the first half of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
that is, I mean, obviously that's the safe guess, but I also think that, part of, obviously, we have what you might call the geek dream here. It's like, what could they do? And yeah, I mean, all told, yes, it's probably going to be a fairly, straightforward thing, where whatever references we're going to get, it's going to be like that first season of Shield, where they're going to mention Steve Rogers, they're going to mention how, in this case Howard Stark, and they might mention one or two characters that we remember from the comic books. I'm sure someone's going to mention Armless Tiger Man at some point, most likely in a less than flattering light. I mean, that there are, of course, because there are some very strange villains from the 1940s comics, but at the same time, we also know from that teaser clip that when we're locking up the 084, the first 084, which is the obelisk, and also we see that is where we first see the Blue Gentleman from Tahiti. That there will be there are extraordinary things in this universe as well. So it may start out, very simply put, as that early moving forward of a straightforward spy drama, but it is in a fantastical world where there are fantastical things. So the fact that Hydra weapons exist in this world, things empowered by the Tesseract already exist in this world, and are possibly something related to what Howard Stark might have been working on, since we do know that he was working with the Tesseract and on the Tesseract. It's not impossible that there are going to be things that are a little bit more out there. I mean, I personally would love it to see the character of Venus in this storyline, another 1940s character, who, obviously is out there, but once that's the thing, is once we've crossed the line that we did in Captain America into this world where, science and technology is going to be a little bit greater. I think you could get things that are a little bit bigger. You could get your Madeline Joyce, you could get Venus, you could get any number of other characters you could get the Wizard. One character that I would actually really find fascinating is if we get the Human Torch. Now, we know that the Vision is going to be in Avengers. And we know that in the Stark Expo shown in Captain America, that the first artificial human, the android Human Torch, was on display. Now, if they're going to somehow cross those two characters, that might be interesting. I mean, that is one of these things where it and this is, I guess, where if we want to get fanciful, we can have a lot of fun while we're waiting for the show to come out. As she's investigating these things, as she's investigating the world, this underworld of paper-clipped Hydra agents and, Howard Stark's secret dealings, you are going to, you can run into these people from the war who, maybe now aren't doing what they were doing, but when we meet them, we'll know who they are. So if we meet Jim Hammond, we're going to know who he is. If we meet Madeline Joyce, we're going to know who she is. And to that extent, further, I don't know how deep they want to go into this, but in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., in the first episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is still one of my favorite scenes, Colby Smulders, Director Hill, or no, actually at that point, Assistant Director Hill, or actually I don't know what her exact title was at the time, but
I think it was
Maria Hill.
Agent. Yeah, I think it was
Yes.
Maria Hill.
Yes. Yeah, I know it's Maria Hill. I don't know if she what her rank was at the time, but anyway, either way, she asks Ward what Shield stands for, strategic homeland intervention, espionage, law enforcement division, or whatever it was. I forget what the exact acronym is at this moment, but he makes the comment. And he says, "What does that mean to you?" And he says, "It tells me that someone really wanted our initials to spell Shield." Now, in the modern Marvel canon, of course, we have learned or been told that Shield is actually a very ancient organization, that it runs much deeper than the founding of the public face of Shield. And of course, Howard Stark is part of that. So that is another thing that they can start to investigate. That could be brought into this, is finding out that Howard Stark is part of this secret society of the Shield, and how those things interact with the story at hand. You could even perhaps reveal that Hydra has a similar ancient origin in this, and that Hydra and Shield maybe had been associates much longer than we've ever imagined, which of course is something that had been suggested in several Nick Fury versus Shield storylines, when Nick Fury has at various times sort of unearthed this connection and had to root out Hydra and Shield and save the day, as he is wont to do.
And wouldn't it be, I don't want to say crazy, but what if we got classic Nick Fury in here? And maybe Nick Fury is kind of, they use the name Nick Fury or Director Fury as kind of like James Bond. And we get the classic looking Nick Fury.
Well, I mean, and I guess by that you mean a white guy.
Well, I mean, yeah, not David Hasselhoff, but
Well, no. Well, I mean, here's what I say. It would be very possible that you could do, for example, because there have been mentions about how old is Samuel Jackson's Nick Fury, because he mentions knowing Howard Stark. So there was that implication in Iron Man 2 that that the Nick Fury of the MCU could be older than he appears. So it's entirely possible that you could see a Sergeant Fury. And, the idea of an African-American sergeant is not that, out of order, even a special forces guy, if he's good enough, who knows? So the idea that you could have a 1940s, Nick Fury played by a younger guy doing a Sam Jackson. Or you could have, as you have in the comics, the idea of a Nick Fury Senior, and then the Nick Fury you have is the Nick Fury Jr., which of course is what you have in the comics. Is Nick Fury's son is right. The African-American Nick Fury, who is currently an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., not the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. And that would be great. I think, whatever they do, I think anything like that, it's going to cause a tizzy. But I think obviously you have a real conundrum with that. One of the things, that Marvel and Disney are very aware of is how what they put into their shows can be read by the public. Because there was actually discussion about, whether or not, Lucy Lawless's character was going to be revealed to have been Victoria Hand's ex in the story. And then they realized that, well, since we're killing her off, we can't really do that because we don't want to be the show that had two lesbians on the show and killed them both off within the first two seasons. So if they were to bring in a Nick Fury, the idea that they might do a Nick Fury Senior, I think it runs the risk of leaving people with a sour taste in their mouth, that they're going to, even though you can argue, well, that's the original story, and even fits into the comic book, I think people would be a little upset not to have Samuel L. Jackson or Samuel L. Jackson, character be the Nick Fury that we have in the MCU. I think that
I don't know. I mean,
this.
If they told a good story with it and things made sense, I don't think it would make it a problem. Like I was saying, if the code name Nick Fury is the kind of that director's chair, then it just makes sense. But you're right. I mean, they could play this out that we would have a younger Samuel L. Jackson type Nick Fury in this because he could be older, maybe and then they could introduce the Infinity Formula, and do something like that. But I was just curious, just because we are talking a lot about the big characters from the 40s and 50s for pre-Marvel, more timely at this point. And and then the 60s with Fury and his Howling Commandos, because we're going to be getting more of the Howling Commandos. I'm just curious to see if Marvel would do something like that, would change it up, because, and you're right, I mean, it wouldn't be, I mean, this world already established with Peggy Carter and her ranking, that that minorities and women and everything, that those kind of things are not affected by this universe, this timeline. And because in real life, we probably wouldn't be having a Peggy Carter at the rank she's at back in World War II.
Well, I mean that, I think that's one of the things about Peggy Carter is that there were female officers in intelligence. I mean, there were a lot of females in these roles, but they were never given appropriate title for their rank. So for example, we know that Peggy Carter is a special agent, but we don't really know. Actually, she might have a rank in there, because I know that Captain America once says, "I'm a captain, I rank you," which of course is always one of my favorite jokes, because as any true Marvel fan knows, Captain America's actual rank was a private. It's an interesting question there, because there were women in these worlds, and there of course were African Americans in these worlds, but they were often sort of allowed to move in these worlds, but they were never given the adequate recognition. This is just as an example, just to pull something from a completely different genre. And I'm trying to remember the name. There was a very good film on HBO starring Mos Def as the I'm blanking on his name because it wasn't in a comic book first. One of the men who developed open heart surgery and I believe eventually the heart transplant. When he is working in this Southern hospital, even though he is, a colleague of the doctor who is the head of the team and, central to it, his actual pay grade was that of a laborer. He was not given the proper pay grade that he should have had, because of course it's a racist society, and that's where he was. And I think with Peggy Carter, you're going to see that, where she's not going to have, she's not going to have, when SHIELD gets founded, she gets pulled into SHIELD by Howard Stark, especially because Howard Stark is putting her in that position. But as we saw in the short, where she is she is in the, essentially the secretarial pool of the post-war spy agency that she's working in. And that was common in the day, where you would have these people who were extremely talented and extremely well-versed and, and occasionally extremely influential, but they weren't given the proper title expressly because of wherever their status was in the society at the time.
Yeah.
So,
and you're right with that. And I think that's the kind of the jumping off point for this show, because Stark can go to her and she'll be the unassuming, maybe Black Widow .01, or version 1.
Yeah.
She can be that spy. And also that movie you were talking about, I think it was with Alan Rickman as well. Something the Lord Made, I think it was called.
Yes. Something the Lord Made. That's the name of it. Yes. Yes, that excellent film, by the way. For those looking for a non-comic book 1940s set film.
But who's listening that's looking for a non-comic film? Come on.
Yes. Well, theoretically, I like films that don't always have comic books in them. So, sometimes I watch science fiction that has absolutely nothing to do with superheroes. So, yeah, and to that extent, though, I mean, in that way, the idea of having a Sergeant Fury who is, an African American sergeant, but who is, who is much more adept at what he's doing than his rank implies,
Right.
That, to me, I even think that actually makes a certain statement, that he's, he's kept as a field grunt, even though obviously he is one of the master spies that you're working with, if they wanted to bring young Nick Fury into the story, if they want to. And, that's always the question, is what do they want to do? But, like I said, there's such a potential to, and especially if they do pick this up for more than the initial 8 episodes, which I really hope they do. I really hope that they go and bring this into a full period series that is, going to allow us to have all sorts of interesting things from Marvel's past, from, things, and that was actually one of the things I was going to get into was, if they explore this idea of S.H.I.E.L.D. being the Order of the Shield or the, prior to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s founding, that there was this other group, you can have everything from, Leonardo da Vinci's steampunk, super weapons to, Frankenstein's monster, which is another thing that I think that you might be able to get away with better in an Agent Carter series than you can in an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. series, which is really starting to explore some of the more, out there concepts, because it is in that period piece. I think that gives you a higher suspension of disbelief,
Well, true, but I think they're going to want to have connectivity to this Marvel universe because...
Well, you still have connectivity. It's just that, that's the thing, that Howard the Duck exists throughout the Marvel universe doesn't take away from...
That's true.
From anything else in the Marvel universe, because it's a reality of the Marvel universe. There's it's the Deadpool effect. Deadpool knows he's a character in a comic book, and when he interacts with people, the tone of the book changes. So any book that Deadpool walks into, things change because his presence is altering that dimension, but it doesn't alter the connection of that book to anything else. When Deadpool is there, it's, even though Deadpool knows it's a comic book and he's going to reference it in so many ways, it still connects in, because sometimes you want a story that's gonna reach out beyond that. And of course, the previous Fantastic Four run, where they had the two books, the FF and the Fantastic Four, just before the current run of Fantastic Four, they did very much have that, where you had in the FF, the art and the stories followed a very Silver Age whiz-bang kind of setup and story construction, but it was still very much tied to the larger Fantastic Four stories that were much more realistic and keeping with the modern Marvel universe. So, I think, and of course, I think that's always the strength of Marvel, is that it really can have it all and be in one universe. And and it trusts fans to understand that, and I think that of course is the big difficulty of any entertainment group, is to trust your fans to get the jokes and to understand what you're trying to say. Because, I think when you don't trust your fans, you're always going to wind up talking down to your fans, and the fans will never like that. And to that end, I suppose one of the reasons why I'd love to see Venus in Agent Carter in some capacity is just because Loki has his first appearance in the Venus comic, and the idea that you might be able to get, because personally, I think getting Tom Hiddleston to do a cameo in any of these shows is completely possible. He's a very game man. He enjoys the character, enjoys the fan base. I'm sure if you wanted to have him do a quick 5-minute scene in one of these things, you could absolutely get it. And, one of the things I've always felt, if anyone who heard my previous podcast know, I think that Loki has been influencing the MCU all the way back to the 40s. And I always felt the clue to that was in Thor, when Loki visits Thor when he's being held by S.H.I.E.L.D. and Loki's wearing a suit. Even though he's invisible, he's still wearing Midgardian clothing while he's there, because he knows that's just how you dress on Midgard. Whereas, all the other Asgardians, when they come to Earth, they're all just wearing their crazy Asgardian clothing. But Loki knows better. Loki knows how to dress for the occasion, because I think Loki's been on Earth for thousands of years. So I would if I could have one wish, it would be to see Tom Hiddleston in this show. As you don't even have to have him reveal himself as Loki. He can just be some shadowy figure in the background throughout it.
That would be very interesting, especially if they bring in the Tesseract here and they do something with that, kind of he getting a glimpse of what they have. Because we know, these characters are hundreds of years old. They've already established that. And, you can bring Asgardians. Heck, Lady Sif can come here. And, Asgardian years, she might be 150 and be very young. But for us, it's no time at all. Exactly.
And of course, that's always my thing with the idea of Loki in pulling these strings, is that, of course, he has time. So, if he starts to plan the 1930s, that it takes till 2030 to really, or 2028 to finally come to fruition. It's no skin off Loki's nose, because he's around for that. But I also, I like the idea, that, I've always liked the idea when people are out of their element, and especially in superhero stories, where you meet the character who is outside of your normal perspective, like when they first meet Thor, when they first run into the Asgardians, and it's like, oh wow, this is such a step above what we know as superheroes, because up until that moment, you had Captain America, and let's say that maybe you had the Wizard who is fast, but I think he topped out at 100 miles an hour as a runner. He wasn't like we get with Quicksilver, where he's that super fast. Maybe you have an android Human Torch here and there in the past.
and I'm curious if they could do that.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of the rights being owned by Fox for the Fantastic Four and the Human Torch character, if they can pull that out, because he was a timely character. I would be very curious. I know they showed the glimpse in Captain America, but there was no basis behind it. It was an Easter egg for us fans. But
actually, at the time, because when there were all these hints about, is Namor going to be in it? Is are the Invaders going to be in it? Marvel said flatly, we own the rights to the 1940s Human Torch. That character is 100% in our rights. And although I'm sure Fox maybe wanted to fight them on that, the fact that they put the Easter egg in there, and this is one of these things that I was saying about so the other night when we were discussing, Sony allowing Spider-Man into a Marvel film, is that, once your right to certain trademarks and copyrights, only extend if you defend them. So that if you allow something to go forward, you essentially give up that right. And although I'm sure Disney felt 100% that they could put the Easter egg in there without question, the fact that Fox didn't, raise an objection at them having what was clearly the Human Torch character in there, essentially established that, yes, Disney has the rights to Jim Hammond, the android Human Torch. So I mean, they absolutely can have Jim Hammond in it. That is, and not the least of which, just because this is also a television show. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that you can parse the language of any of these scripts, but the actual, what Fox has is the Fantastic Four. And now to go into something actually a little deeper into that, in the last episode, or not the last episode, the episode before that, Hen in the Wolf House, or Wolf in the Hen House.
Yeah.
Yeah. They make reference to what I think was a reference to Skrull cows when they're talking about, the milk coming from the cow, from the sample Bessie. And as soon as I heard said that, that's them working Skrull cows into the MCU. Now, I don't know exactly how they're going to explain Skrull cows, but, to me, that just jumped out at me that there's a Skrull cow here. You do know what the Skrull cows are?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's interesting that I totally missed that reference.
Yes.
Huh.
Yeah. Well, it was very small, but yeah, basically, Fitzsimmons is looking at the sample and said, "How could?" I think she said, "How could camel's milk come from an ordinary cow?" And Keith, her supervisor says, "I don't know. The sample's just labeled Bessie." So to me, that just said that's got to be a Skrull cow. Which, and again, among interesting characters you could have in the because of course the Skrulls are around in this period too. That's a thing to remember, based on what we have Jarvis, and which is, hey, and it's going to be great to have Jarvis, an actual Jarvis, in this storyline. And having Jarvis and Peggy, doing a sort of, a sort of English version of the Avengers, with Mr. Steed and Miss Peel. Doing their impression of that there, I think is going to be very interesting. But, it does open up this possibility that, yes, they're going to be exploring this dark hidden world of late 40s MCU. But once they're in there, because we know that in that world, there could be anything. There could be anything from ancient S.H.I.E.L.D. organizations to Skrulls or Skrull cows or Kree or Atlanteans or, ancient Greek gods and goddesses, because we know they're in there. We know that they're in this universe. It's just about what are they going to uncover. And, in 8 episodes in January, maybe they'll keep it, maybe they'll play it close to the vest, but, I guess to some extent, they also have a big incentive to play it a little broader, because they have the MCU that they're playing in,
Yeah.
They have a universe that's been established with space aliens and talking raccoons and Norse gods and Hulks, So the fact that they might want to explore some of these characters a little deeper is, to me, a very good possibility, in the sense that I'd like to see it. As far as geekery goes. I would like to see it, and so to me, that's enough of a reason for them to explore it. And of course, all of this can fit into the story that they have presented. You can have those. You can have this. You can have secret conspiratorial groups. You can have government conspiracies that they touch on. And I think, if they really want to explore Agent Carter as possibly something more than just an 8-episode miniseries, and actually pull it into a full series as the founding of S.H.I.E.L.D. with Agent Carter, putting as many of these Easter eggs in here as possible is good. Having references to the Red, White, and Truth story, having references to the Whizzer and the Human Torch, all feed into this. And if we get that the vision that gets created has some tie to that, original android human that was at the Stark Expo those many years ago, it makes sense to bring some of that out here before we get to it in the Avengers.
Yeah, and I mean, what we know for the Avengers Age of Ultron is that Tony, he doesn't create Ultron himself. He is awakening a program from this era, it sounds like. So we might even get to see the start of Howard working on this program for these androids that eventually become, Ultron and like you said, with Vision and stuff. Because I think Vision would come, because Vision, in the comics is basically kind of the child of Ultron. I don't know if we would see it that way, but I am intrigued by the fact that this is something that leading forward, go forward for Avengers Age of Ultron, that it's something that Tony awakens and it's not all his tinkering.
Exactly. I mean, right now is the best time for this, because right now we can imagine anything, and hopefully anything will happen. That is my hope, is that we're going to see something. It's one thing that I think Marvel has done, at least for me so far, is that even when I'm wrong, I'm surprised. And I like being surprised. And I'm looking forward to being surprised by Agent Carter. And I think I'm going to be. Whatever they decide to explore, if they decide to go deep into the weeds of Marvel's history, or, play it real straight until the very end when they reveal something really shocking. I'm looking forward to it. One last character that I wanted to bring up that I thought really could fit into this nicely, and possibly even just have him as kind of a throwaway character, would be William Burnside, who is the guy who becomes the Cap in the 1950s and actually rediscovers the super soldier serum. I think, having him while he's doing research into Cap, interacting in this storyline might be really interesting. Just because, those of us who know where it goes, and you can have him, I think it would be interesting, especially because he's going to be coming from Cap already, as seeing Cap as not a human being, but as this legend. And, having him interact with Carter, who of course knew him as a man, would be interesting. But these and many other connections, I think we can explore the next time, because there's always going to be more connections that we can talk about, and more things that we could hope to see in Agent Carter or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or anywhere else in the MCU. So I think that's our show.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, I have been Charming Charlie Esser.
And this is The Amazing Alil.
And this has been SuperConnectivity Podcast. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next week.
If you would like to donate to help pay for this and other Southgate Media Group podcasts, simply go to our website, southgatemediagroup.com, and click on the donate button. It can be as little as $1 or, well, as much as you want. Help keep this fun going by supporting this and our other shows. Thanks again for listening, everyone. You're the best fans in the world.